The last time we watched the Fed conjure trillions of dollars with a keystroke to buy government bonds, which leaves a strange question hanging. If the government is borrowing all this money, who is actually lending it? America owes more than $36 trillion. So who do we owe it to? And underneath that sits an even stranger question. If a country prints its own money, can it ever really go broke? Start by splitting that giant number in two. About a fifth of the national debt is money the government owes to itself. Over the years, funds like Social Security took in more than they paid out, and by law, they parked the surplus in Treasury bonds. So one pocket of the government holds the other pocket's bonds. That's called intragovernmental debt, real obligations, but the government is both the borrower and the lender. The other 4/5, around $29 trillion, is the debt held by the public. And this is the real thing: bonds sold to investors at home and abroad. When people ask who owns America's debt, this is the pile that actually matters. And here's what surprises people. Most of it we owe to ourselves. Roughly 2/3 of the publicly held debt is owned inside the United States by pension funds holding your retirement, by the mutual funds inside your 401k, by banks and insurance companies, by state and local governments, and by ordinary Americans holding savings bonds. When the Treasury pays interest, most of it flows right back to American savers. And one domestic holder stands out: the Federal Reserve itself. Remember the quantitative easing from last time? All those bonds the Fed bought, it still holds. Trillions of dollars of them. So the nation's own central bank is one of the single largest owners of the nation's debt. The government, in a sense, lending to the government, which leaves the part everyone worries about, the foreign-owned share. Investors outside the United States hold roughly a third of the publicly held debt, somewhere around $8 to $9 trillion. And the biggest single foreign lender, it isn't China, it's Japan, holding about $1.1 trillion. China is second, with roughly $750 billion, and its holdings have actually been shrinking for years. Britain and a handful of financial centers round out the top. So why would other countries lend America so much? Because a U.S. Treasury bond is, by wide agreement, the safest and most easily traded financial asset on Earth. Countries that sell us goods pile up dollars, and those dollars have to go somewhere. Treasuries are where the world parks its rainy day savings, which brings up the fear you've heard. What if China dumps its treasuries to punish us? Here, it's worth being clear-eyed. China selling in size would push bond prices down, but that would also hammer the value of China's own remaining pile and drive its currency up, hurting its exports. It would be throwing a punch that lands partly on itself. It could sting, but it is not the doomsday switch it's often made out to be. But there is a real bite, and it isn't foreign. It's the interest. In the 2024 fiscal year, the government paid about $881 billion just in interest on the debt, and that number is now passing $1 trillion. Interest has grown bigger than the entire defense budget, bigger than Medicare, second only to Social Security. That is the true cost of the debt, not who holds it, but what it costs to carry. So now the real question, the one underneath all of this, if the debt is this large and the interest this heavy, can the United States actually go broke? Can it run out of money the way a household or a business can? Here's the distinction that changes everything. The United States borrows in its own currency. It doesn't owe gold or euros or somebody else's money. It owes dollars. And it is the only entity on earth that can create dollars. That is a profoundly different position from a family that can run out of dollars or a company that can run out of cash. It's also different from countries that borrow in someone else's money. When Argentina owes dollars, it cannot print, or when Greece owed euros it didn't control, they can be forced into default, genuinely unable to pay. The United States never faces that trap on its own currency debt. It can always create the dollars to meet a payment. In that narrow mechanical sense, a country that issues its own currency cannot be forced into bankruptcy. But can always pay is not the same as free. Paying by creating money on a large enough scale does something. It can erode what each dollar is worth. Economists sometimes call runaway inflation a kind of soft default. The debt is honored, but in dollars worth less. That, not insolvency, is the true ceiling, and there's a self-inflicted risk on top of it. The debt ceiling, a limit Congress sets on itself, where the country could simply choose not to pay on time. That would be a default by decision, not by economics. So broke turns out to be the wrong word. A currency issuer can't be forced into bankruptcy the way you or I can, but it is bound by inflation, by credibility, by politics. The national debt isn't a bill that suddenly comes due. It's a claim on the future. And the honest question was, never can we pay it. It's what does paying it cost? And who bears that cost? Which opens the deepest question of all. If a dollar is just something the government can create at will, why does it hold any value at all? What actually stands behind the money in your pocket? That's next time on Monetary Mechanics. One note, as always, this channel is here to explain how the system works. It's education, not financial advice. If it made the machine a little clearer, subscribe, and we'll keep taking money apart, one piece at a time.